In this video we are going to be exploring if Moses is really the hero that mainstream religion portrays him to be. When Moses was born, the Pharaoh had ordered all the male babies of the slaves to be killed. So Moses's mother puts him in a basket in the river, and the daughter of the Pharaoh finds him and raises him as her own. And the child grew, and she brought him unto the Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses, and she said, Because I drew him out of the water. Exodus chapter 2 verse 10. So Moses grows up as an upper-class Egyptian. And one can assume he has a pretty good life. The Bible doesn't go into a lot of detail about why Moses starts killing people, but it implies that Moses didn't like the way the slaves were being treated, so he kills one of the Egyptians that he sees beating one of the slaves. And he looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian, and hid him in the sand. Exodus chapter 2 verse 12. Now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh, and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Exodus chapter 2 verse 15. So after Moses kills the Egyptian, he decides to flee Egypt rather than face the consequences of what he had done. While in Midian, Moses talks to God through a burning bush, and God tells Moses he wants him to go back to Egypt and tell the Pharaoh to let the slaves go. But Moses says that he can't do it. God tells him not to worry, he will be with him, but Moses still refuses, and this goes on for about a whole page of the Bible. Moses really doesn't want anything to do with going back to Egypt. So after a while of trying to convince Moses to go back to Egypt, God decides to send Aaron with him to help him along the way. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, Is not Aaron the Levite thy brother? I know that he can speak well. And also, behold, he cometh forth to meet thee, and when he seeth thee, he will be glad in his heart. Exodus chapter 4 verse 14. But even still, with God sending Aaron with him to help, Moses still doesn't want to go back to Egypt, so God tells him. And the Lord said unto Moses in Midian, Go, return into Egypt, for all the men are dead which sought thy life. Exodus chapter 4 verse 19. And finally Moses decides to return to Egypt. So this is what happens when Moses and Aaron get to Egypt. And Aaron spake all the words which the Lord had spoken unto Moses, and did the signs in the sight of the people. Exodus chapter 4 verse 30. So when they go to Egypt, they go to the slaves first, and it's Aaron that convinces the slaves to follow Moses. Moses doesn't do anything. After Aaron convinces the people to follow Moses, they go to talk to the Pharaoh. And Moses and Aaron went in unto Pharaoh, and they did so as the Lord had commanded, and Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh, and before his servants, and it became a serpent. Exodus chapter 7 verse 10. So not only does Aaron do all the talking to the slaves, he also does the talking to the Pharaoh, and it is Aaron who throws down his staff and it turns into a serpent. And God tells Moses to get Aaron to do the first plague. And the Lord spake unto Moses, Say unto Aaron, Take thy rod, and stretch out thine hand upon the waters of Egypt, upon their streams, upon their rivers, and upon their ponds, and upon all their pools of water, that they may become blood. Exodus chapter 7 verse 19. So the first plague is not done by Moses, it is done by Aaron. Now let's look at the second plague. And Aaron stretched out his hand over the water of Egypt, and frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. Exodus chapter 8 verse 6. So Aaron also does the second plague. Now let's look at the third plague. And they did so, for Aaron stretched out his hand with his rod and smote the dust of the earth, and it became lice in man and in beast, all the dust of the land became lice throughout all the land of Egypt. Exodus chapter 8 verse 17. So Aaron does all the talking to the slaves and all the talking to the Pharaoh, and it is Aaron who does the first three plagues. The fourth plague is swarms of flies, and the fifth plague is the death of the cattle, and God does both of them by himself. So this brings us to the sixth plague. And they took ashes of the furnace and stood before Pharaoh, and Moses sprinkled it up toward heaven, and it became a boil breaking forth with blains upon man and upon beast. Exodus chapter 9 verse 10. So it is not until the sixth plague that Moses gets enough courage to participate. And Moses and Aaron do the sixth plague together. Moses goes on to do plagues 7, 8 and 9 by himself, and God does the 10th plague, and when they leave Egypt Moses parts the Red Sea. So it appears that Moses is becoming more self-confident and is starting to become the leader that God told him he was going to make him. This is after Moses and the people get to Mount Sinai and just before Moses gets the 10 Commandments. And the Lord said unto him, Away. Get thee down, and thou shalt come up, thou and Aaron with thee. But let not the priests and the people break through to come up unto the Lord, lest he break forth upon them. Exodus chapter 19 verse 24. It appears that God gets angry with Moses and tells him to go get Aaron, suggesting that Aaron helped Moses get the 10 Commandments. This is much later, and God tells Moses and Aaron that because they rebelled against God at the water of Meribah, Aaron has to die on the mountain. And Moses stripped Aaron of his garments and put them upon Eleazar his son, and Aaron died there in the top of the mount, and Moses and Eleazar came down from the mount. Numbers chapter 20 verse 28. You may think that Aaron's death doesn't have anything to do with Moses, but I think that it does. If you look at how Moses dies later, I think that Aaron's death is another example that Aaron sets for Moses to follow. Now this is where Moses dies. And Moses went up from the plains of Moab unto the mountain of Nebo to the top Pisgah that is over against Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land of Gilead unto Dan. Deuteronomy chapter 34 verse 1. After God shows Moses all the land, Moses dies there on top of the mountain. Which is the same way Aaron faces his death. Aaron doesn't try to flee or complain, he simply accepts that he is going to die and climbs the mountain willingly to meet his death. In the beginning Moses is terrified of dying, so he flees Egypt and refuses to return. Aaron has to go with him to get Moses to go back and face the Pharaoh. But even still Moses is afraid to talk to the slaves, so Aaron convinces them to follow Moses. But Moses is also afraid to talk to the Pharaoh, so Aaron talks to the Pharaoh and does the first few plagues for Moses while Moses is building up courage. Aaron also helps Moses talk to God and get the commandments at the mountain. And finally Aaron shows Moses how to face death. God appoints Aaron as kind of a guardian angel to Moses to help him become a leader, and I think Aaron does an amazing job. He always goes before Moses and does all the heavy lifting. He never complains, and even though it is him that is doing everything, he lets Moses have the spotlight. If you look at the kind of man Moses is in the beginning, and the man he becomes by the end of the story, I don't think there is any way Moses would have made such a transformation without Aaron guiding him. And this is why I think Aaron is the real hero in this story. Often when I hear people talk about the Exodus, it is always about the plagues or the parting of the Red Sea and the people escaping slavery. But I think there is another main point in the story that is often missed. I think a lot of people overlook how God uses the events in the Exodus to transform Moses. He goes from a young man who kills people and then runs and hides to the leader of a nation. And he goes from someone who literally can't do anything without Aaron holding his hand to a man who walks up the mountain alone to face his own death. Throughout the plagues, God keeps hardening the Pharaoh's heart to keep the Pharaoh from giving in and letting the slaves go, and I have heard a lot of people say that God should not have done that. That instead God should have softened the Pharaoh's heart and then he would have let the slaves go sooner. And that is true. If God had not hardened the Pharaoh's heart, he would have let the slaves go sooner. But if God had not hardened the Pharaoh's heart, then Moses would not have grown as a person. Moses was too scared to stand up to the Pharaoh until the 7th plague. He does the 6th plague with Aaron, but he doesn't get the courage to stand alone until the 7th plague, and I think that is the reason God hardens the Pharaoh's heart. God could have gotten someone else to do Moses's job and it would have went faster, no doubt. Obviously from reading the Exodus we can see that Aaron could have done it by himself with no problems, but I think the main reason that the Exodus happens the way it does is for Moses's development as a person. There is a lot of incredible things that happen in the Exodus, but I think one of the most incredible things is the transformation Moses makes from the beginning of the story to the end. And I think for Moses to become the man that he became, I think the Exodus had to happen the way that it did. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my thoughts. Please like, subscribe and share, and let me know what you think in the comments. And let me know if there is any part of the Bible that you would like my big-headed opinion on for future videos.